Hey everyone, welcome to the Council of Trent podcast. I'm your host, Catholic Answers apologist and speaker, Trent Horn. I am here at the Catholic Answers annual conference in San Diego. Joining me is our newest apologist, Mr. Joe Heschmeyer.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So we just got done with the panel. So we got the live Q&A panel with the apologist, your first one. How do you feel it went?
I think it was a lot of fun to do. I'm a terrible judge of my own stuff, but it was great being in the presence of three people who answer questions extremely well on ones I didn't always have to answer.
I thought you handled yourself with great aplomb. You did a very good job. It was great. It's fun, especially to be up there, especially for some of the questions where we could just interact with each other and kind of have fun, a little back and forth. I'm hoping to share that with you all on the podcast. I don't know if that episode will, if I'll get the files, and if I do, it might air before this episode or after. I don't know, but I'm sure I'll get it up there. But today I wanted to ask you, Joe, about the papacy, because you wrote a book, Pope Peter.
Defending the Church's most distinctive doctrine in a time of crisis.
Because it really is. When it comes down to it, the one doctrine that divides Catholicism from non-Catholicism.
Exactly. Like, you can't, there are more important, like I intentionally didn't call it the most important doctrine, right? Like, belief in God is more important than belief in the Pope.
Right. The Trinity is the central mystery of the Christian faith.
Right. But there are all sorts of Christians who believe in the Trinity who don't believe in the papacy. So that's not enough to distinguish Catholic from non-Catholic. Even something like the structure of the church or the real presence.
Right, because the Orthodox.
Exactly. So if you want to know whether you should be Catholic or not, the easiest one answer is, is the Pope really instituted by Christ?
Right.
And if the papacy is of apostolic and divine origin, you should be Catholic. And if it isn't, you shouldn't be.
Well, then, so you wrote your book, Pope Peter, and it covers a lot of this. So what I thought would be fun to talk about in this episode is an argument for the papacy, for the bishop, for Peter and his office to have this particular leadership in the church, an argument a lot of people haven't really heard. Because we're familiar, we think about why do Catholics believe in the papacy? Matthew 16:18, you are Peter, I give you the keys to the kingdom, on this rock I build my church. The classic text people debate. John 21 would be another example. Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. And when I read evangelical scholars, a lot of them say, it's basically Matthew 16, John 21. Here's the issue with these passages. But there's another passage that does relate to the papacy, not a lot of people discuss, but it's something you include in your book, and you think it's a very kind of underrated defense of the papacy.
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of really good proofs for the papacy that I think go underrated and under-discussed. But I think the one that is worth mentioning the most is Luke 22, in which at the Last Supper, the disciples start debating which of them is the greatest. And the reason I like it is because a lot of times when evangelicals say they reject the papacy, it turns out they have a really kind of comically skewed understanding of the Pope and his role.
Right.
Where the Pope is the guy who just decides every issue and every doctrine, and he can just change church teaching if he wants to, and that's just not what Catholics actually believe about the papacy.
They think the Pope is like some kind of a king or a tyrant
over
the church.
It's something that's at least as powerful as the Mormon president, and maybe more powerful. And it's just that's just not the view. And it's not a good Christian view of leadership at all, and not a good view of the papacy specifically.
Because I think some people, and the passage that we're going to talk about is it Luke 22?
Yeah, Luke 22. Really, I like to begin it with verse 24. The heart of it is verse 30 to 31.
And so it's the dispute about greatness. And I know some Protestants will say, Jesus in the dispute about greatness, when the disciples asked, who is the greatest among you? If Peter were the Pope, why didn't Jesus say, Peter is the greatest among you, because he is the Pope. The end.
Yeah. The amazing thing is, if you actually read the full chapter, he almost does that.
Tell us more how it points in that direction.
So the first thing that I think is really interesting about this is he doesn't say no to their question. He doesn't say, you're all equal. You're all equally great. There's none of that. Every time they argue about greatness, he never rebukes them. He never corrects them. He always just tells them how to be greater.
Right. And so he acknowledges there's being greater and a greatest.
Exactly. And within, so he says a couple things. In verse 28 and 29, he describes them as those who stood with him in his trials and who will judge the angels in heaven. That's on 12 thrones,
Right.
which affirms that the apostles have a special authority, an eternal authority. This is a small point, but an important one for those who may be familiar with like dispensationalism, that views as like a church age that comes to an end, in which the whole apostolic structure goes away. Christ is very clear it doesn't. And that kind of like leadership is something that's enduring because designed by him.
Okay, so there might be, when you say dispensationalists, there's some Protestants who would say, oh yeah, we have apostles, we have apostolic leadership, but then when they die, it's just sola scriptura.
Well, and actually even, so I'm thinking more like Darby and his followers, Schofield. There is, within evangelicalism, you will find those who believe in like 7 ages of humanity, in which the church age is really just kind of like an interruption before like Israel gets their country back. And so if you're familiar with like Tim LaHaye with the Left Behind series.
I was about to say, Darby and Schofield are the originators of the rapture doctrine.
Yes, rapture comes out of dispensationalism.
Right.
So those two ideas are closely intertwined. But that views the church as like a temporary mechanism and not as like an enduring institution. Christ in Luke 22 is very clear that it is actually something enduring, that it's part of the nature of the church he established and doesn't go away even with death.
Okay. So yeah, take us through the passage a little bit to show how that's the case.
Okay, cool. So in verse 24, the dispute rises. In verse 25 and 26, he says, the kings of the Gentiles lord their authorities over other. It should not be so among you. Instead, he lays out the idea that to lead is to serve, and he gives himself as the example and says, I am among you as one who serves. So he gives this classic idea of servant leadership. And then he gives a bit about the 12 tribes judging the angels, or
So
you see the 12 thrones.
Right, so they're servants, but they have this leadership capacity over everything, kind of.
Exactly. And so what makes the apostles distinct is they are called to be servant leaders over everyone.
Right.
And eventually even over the angels. And then in verse 30, he says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has desired to sift you, and that's like a y'all, let's say you plural,
Right.
as wheat.
In the Greek, we can tell he is specifically, because in English, when you and I say, you do this, or hey, you in the context can be singular or plural, but in the Greek, you can see definitely if it's plural or singular, and we know here it's definitely plural.
Exactly. Like we don't have a standard you plural in English, like you guys, yens, yous, y'all.
Hey, yous guys!
Yeah, none of those quite sound right coming from the mouth of our Lord.
Right.
But he's saying you plural.
Okay.
So you all. He's demanded to have you all that he might sift you all like wheat. But then he switches from the plural to the singular. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brethren.
And that's what he's saying to Peter.
That's what he's saying to Peter. Exactly. So he's just said, okay, you want to know what greatness is in the church? It's servant leadership. And all of you are called to be servant leaders for all time. And one of you, Simon Peter, is called even to strengthen your brethren, called even to be a servant leader to the other servant leaders. We have a papal title for that. Servant of the servants of God.
Right.
Like that's the heart of the papacy. Like the bishops and the successors to the apostles exist to serve the people of God, the church. And the Pope exists to serve both the people of God, the church, and even the other bishops.
And so what's interesting is I've actually talked about this on a previous podcast, because sometimes the headers or the chapter headings, not even just the chapter headings, but sometimes when you read your Bible at home, there's the little headers, right, to let you know, a dispute about greatness, a dispute about taxes. I love when there's a header over just like 2 verses.
Yes.
Like there's just like the 2-verse teaching of Jesus, and got to make sure it's distinct. We can't let you read it on your own. And so I think sometimes a header will interrupt the dispute about greatness, and then the part where Jesus tells Peter, I have prayed for you that your faith will not fail. The idea that people lose that they're connected to each other.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's something we have to be very cautious of. Like the chapters and the verses and the headers and subheaders are not found in the original text. I have this same problem with Revelation 12.
Right.
That the last verse of Revelation 11, John says he sees the temple in heaven open, he sees the Ark of the Covenant, and then he sees Mary, who is prefigured as a temple and as an ark. You lose all of that connection if you just do a hard stop, verse 11, or chapter 11, and then start reading 12 as if it's some other book or some other work. Like
Right.
it flows, and we can interrupt that flow sometimes. So in Luke 22, I breezed right past some headers in the RSV because this is all one conversation. They're saying, what is greatness? He says, here's what greatness is. Here's how all 12 of you live it, and here's how one of you is called to live it in a singular way. Satan's after all 12 of you, and you might expect Jesus in that situation to say, look, Satan is trying to devour the 12 of you. Mm-hmm. You're my chosen band. You are the 12 people I've picked out of all the world to follow me. I'm going to pray for all 12 of you. I've got time. But he doesn't.
Right.
He prays for one of them and then tells him to strengthen his brethren. That's an incredible show of Peter's role and his authority. Jesus is making a point of doing things that way, even though it's frankly less efficient than just saying I'm the second person of the Trinity. I'll ward him off. You guys were going to be praying to me anyway.
Right.
Or I'll pray for all 12 of you. No, he prays for Peter to show us something. This is all a demonstration. This is in Scripture for a reason, and we're being told this for a reason.
Now, and so this sort of connects a little bit to Peter's own letter, 1 Peter, where he talks about being clothed with humility. Because it's interesting, people will say, why doesn't Peter just say, I'm the Pope, listen to me, in his own letter? He's kind of taking this advice to heart.
Yeah, in fact, so even in Mark's gospel, for instance, Mark's gospel is the one that Peter has the most influence over. As we know from 1 Peter 5, Mark is with him in Rome. Mark is believed to be his translator,
right.
And then is the one who goes out from him to Egypt to found the church there. Mark doesn't include all of Peter's good moments in his gospel. If you want to find the almost anti-Petrine seeming gospel, it's the one Peter had the most role. It focuses on his faults. It doesn't focus on all of his glories. And
Mark's gospel.
Yeah, so he doesn't have the confession of faith with then the gift of the keys of the kingdom. That's in Matthew's gospel. Mark doesn't include it. You don't have all of the high points of what Jesus kind of offers. So the closest we have to a gospel coming from Peter doesn't focus on this. What I mean to show by that is not therefore Peter bad. It's therefore Peter's humble.
Yeah, why? So do you think that Mark's gospel is not as trumpeting Peter because essentially he's Peter's close associate? The church father Papias is the one who tells us in the early 2nd century Mark was the interpreter. He recorded Peter's sermons. You think he just kind of knowing him so well, thinking he's not going to want me to go overboard on this?
Well, yeah, and not only that, but because Peter's role was known and recognized in the early church, it was not necessary. And I think 2 examples here. One of the ways we can distinguish the true gospels from false ones is that the true gospels don't even announce who their authors are. That there's an interesting case for the early authenticity of them. And strangely, actually, Bart Ehrman points to this as well, that when the first 4 gospels come out, they don't need to say, I, so-and-so, etc. Because everyone just knows who they're from, and they carry that authority with them.
Right.
Later false gospels, pretending to be from other people, say I'm John, the beloved disciple, that doesn't happen in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. None of them announce, here's who I am, here's why I'm important, accept my authority.
Because people know who it is.
Exactly. Likewise, frequently, when the papacy is at its strongest, the Pope isn't saying, listen to me, in the same way that any good leader, when things are going well, isn't sending out angry emails saying, everyone has to listen to me and obey me and follow my authority. When your family is doing well and your kids are listening, you're not don't forget I'm your dad. That only happens when there's kind of that breakdown in authority, when chaos kind of emerges.
But when there's an understanding of authority, then someone like Peter or his successor doesn't have to thunder their claim because people already accept it. And we don't want to read that anachronistically back in. Right. Awesome stuff. Joe, thank you so much for sharing with us. Where can people learn more about you and get a copy of Pope Peter?
So Catholic.com, and you can go to shop.catholic.com, and the book is called Pope Peter.
And you're working on another book right now.
I am. The early church was the Catholic Church.
Right. So the idea that Constantine did not invent the Catholic Church in the 4th century?
Believe it or not. So all of the evidence I'm looking for from there is from the year 200 or earlier. And looking at things what did they believe about baptism, about the Eucharist, about the role of bishops, and about the Gospels.
I'm super excited. You all should be excited as well. Be excited about Joe Heschmeyer, everybody. Newest Catholic Answers apologist. I remember when they used to call me that. First, they called me the youngest apologist. Then they called me the newest apologist. And now they just call me that guy that does a podcast and stuff. But now you're the newest apologist, so I don't know if you're the youngest apologist.
I am 36, so I don't know.
I'm 36 too.
March 4th, 1985. Were you before or after that?
I was January 85.
Still the youngest apologist.
Am I? Wait, wouldn't you be if you're born in March? No, wait.
March is before. Oh, so you January? Not. I thought you said July. I'm sorry.
Yeah, January. So you.
You're no
You're the youngest apologist. Look at this little kid. Look at this little kid with his beard. I can't grow a beard. I'm so sad. Just kidding. Hey, Joe, thanks for stopping by. It was super fun.
My pleasure.
Definitely check out his work. Check out his blog, by the way, Shameless Popery. It is amazing. That would make a good title for a podcast if you ever want to do one.
Tune into this space.
So I'm just saying. So thank you guys so much, and I hope you all have a very blessed day. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you want to help us produce more great content like this, be sure to click subscribe and go to TrentHornPodcast.com to become a premium subscriber. You'll help us create more videos like this and get access to bonus content and sneak peeks of our upcoming projects.